Yuri was a dim-witted fool who recently lost his parents in an accident. After dismissing his servants, his life became a survival game until a mysterious maid showed up at his doorstep and turned him into a shameless simp. A few days after the new maid began working for him, Yuri couldn't help but watch her while she worked. He found it suspicious that she decided to work for him despite his circumstances, and kept wondering if she was up to something. When she noticed him watching her, she approached him and asked if he was watching because he was curious about her or if he was training to become a great stalker like Joe. Yuri was surprised by how accurate she was about his curiosity, and since he was denser than Asta, he accused her of being a mind reader. He admitted that he was so curious about her that he couldn't sleep at night because his mind kept going back to her. However, he wasn't sure if it was because of her bewitching eyes or because she'd come out of nowhere. After his rant, the maid offered to make him some tea to calm his nerves, and he agreed. Later, he was in the study when the maid brought the tea, and while she poured it into the cup, he had an internal debate. He tried to make sense of why she'd come to work for him, and most especially why he'd hired her in the first place. When she looked up and saw him watching her, she smiled at him. That smile caught him off guard and made him wonder if he'd made a big mistake bringing her into his home. He recalled what happened in the days leading up to her arrival. The day before, he'd bid his butler and maids farewell. The trio had apologized for leaving him, but he assured them that he understood their reason. You see, his parents had recently passed away, and after inheriting their estate, he discovered they had been as broke as your boyfriend. This prompted him to dismiss all his servants as he had no way to pay them. Yuri knew leaving without servants would be hard, but he had no other choice and was determined to make his new situation work. The next day, he woke up feeling energized and ready to put in the work. He got dressed and then went downstairs to prepare breakfast, which got burnt because of his obvious lack of culinary skills. However, since he had no other option, he ate the charred remains of his breakfast and then went to do the laundry. This was also a bust because the dumb idiot put so much detergent into the machine that the room filled up with soap. Next, he tried to clean up his library, but that also ended badly, so he gave up and laid on the couch feeling tired. Just as he began to wonder if he was more useless than the almighty Sakura, his stomach began to growl. Since he'd concluded earlier in the day that he wasn't the reincarnation of Sanji, Yuri decided to eat some cup noodles instead of trying to cook up a storm. After his meal, he began walking around the empty mansion, and the moment he stopped by the steps, the door opened. Yuri found himself staring at a purple-eyed maid, who he was sure he'd never seen before, so he approached her. He asked who she was, but the girl ignored his question and told him she wanted to work for him. The girl told him that she was well aware that he was in the same class as a poor church mouse. However, she was willing to work for him as long as he let her stay as a live-in maid, so he didn't have to worry about paying her. Yuri tried to refuse, but she pointed out that living alone in a house as big as that wasn't good. As she spoke, she moved closer to him and looked him in the eyes, causing Yuri to question where he'd seen her before. Her eyes mesmerized him so much that he forgot how to speak for a moment until she asked what his decision was. Yuri told her he would let her work for him, but if he discovered she wasn't good at her job, he'd send her back to the streets where she belonged. In the present, Yuri told himself that he shouldn't have hired her, but he also couldn't deny that since she started working for him, things had improved. The house always sparkled after she cleaned it, his clothes were always washed and smelled nice, and every meal she made was delicious. Everything felt like a dream, and for some reason, Yuri thought she'd cast a spell on him. Granted, that was the most absurd thing he could have come up with, but since he had a 500 MHz processor brain, he chose to believe she was a witch. He wasted no time in accusing her of using magic, and stated that all the things she did weren't normal. He even added that her eyes were an unusual color for a human, so he was sure she wasn't one. The girl thought he sounded like a complete nutjob, but since she didn't want him to feel more stupid than he already was, she decided to play along. She told him that he was smart for noticing that she was a witch, and admitted that she'd bewitched him with her eyes. Anyone else would have known she was messing with them, but not the feather-brained idiot, Yuri. He believed every word she uttered and said he finally understood why her beautiful eyes drew him in every time he looked at her. The maid was shocked by his outburst and quickly came up with a reason to leave the room because she was feeling overwhelmed. Later that day, Yuri watched the maid while she hung up the laundry because he hoped he could find clues to help him understand why she'd come to work for him. When she noticed him watching, she turned to ask if he'd finished his homework, but he ignored her question and asked what she was plotting. Instead of answering the question, she just smiled, making him insist that she had something in mind, but she told him that wasn't the case. She said she'd smiled because she found his half-assed detective work adorable. Yuri argued that she was lying and went on to tell her that every time he saw her smile, his heart skipped a beat. He also said a bunch of other stuff which sounded very much like something a guy would say to a girl he was trying to riss up. However, we all know Yuri is a clueless noob, so he had no idea that his honest words were the reason his maid was as red as a tomato. When he insisted she tell him her motives for coming to work with him, she told him it wasn't the right time, which shocked him. That night, Yuri had a dream about his maid, and in that dream, she was dressed as an evil witch. She tried to get him to eat some food she'd prepared, but Yuri refused to take it, and when he screamed, he suddenly fell out of his bed. The unexpected hug from Fleur-Kun made him realize he'd been dreaming, so he decided to go to the kitchen to get some water. When he got closer to the kitchen, he discovered the lights were on, so he became scared as he assumed someone had broken in. He thought of waking the maid up so she could help him out, but decided not to when he realized that doing so would make him look like a cowardly wimp. When he finally walked into the kitchen, he felt relieved to see his maid. She was standing in front of the stove, the book in her hand, and was busy stirring the pot on the stove, which he found suspicious. However, he didn't let her know he was there and quietly shut the door before returning to bed. The next morning, Yuri went down for breakfast, and as usual the food was delicious. But when he noticed one of the dishes resembled the one from his dream, he became suspicious. Immediately, he accused her of putting something in the food, and let her know that he'd seen her in the kitchen the night before. The maid smiled mischievously, and admitted to using a special ingredient called love. Yuri then accused her of trying to bewitch him, and said her so-called love potion was the reason he couldn't stop thinking about her. The poor girl was left speechless, as she didn't know how to explain to the pea-brained dummy before her that she'd only been practicing her cooking the night before. Later that day, Yuri ran into his maid cleaning the windows in the hallway, and as he watched her clean, he realized he knew nothing about her. He had no idea where she came from, who she was, or even what her name was for that matter. Any sensible person would have asked these questions before hiring someone to work for them. However, Yuri had been born stupid, so he didn't think to ask her any of these questions before. When he decided to approach her and ask her about herself, she surprised him by addressing him by his name. He pointed out that she'd never done so before, and she told him there was nothing wrong with a servant addressing their master by their name. Yuri argued that there was and said if she did that it would make them look like a married couple. He said his parents called each other by name and were always very affectionate with one another, which made her blush. She had to excuse herself before she said anything, and after she left, Yuri began to wonder how she knew his name. He even went as far as thinking she had come to steal his information so she could sell it on the dark web or to criminals. Determined to learn more about her, Yuri went searching in the library for her resume and discovered that her name was Lila. Later at the dinner table, Yuri anticipated that Lila would address him by his name, but to his surprise, she called him master instead. He then asked her to share more about herself and revealed that he knew her name, which surprised her. He told her that he would love to learn more about her, but declared wouldn't trust her for the time being. The following morning, Lila went to wake up Sleeping Beauty, saw Yuri for breakfast, and before she left his room, she gave him some new pants to put on. During breakfast, someone rang the doorbell, so Lila left to answer the door, leaving him to wonder who was at the door. When she returned, she brought back a box containing a Nintendo Switch ripoff, which he'd been dying to get for a while. Yuri was so happy to finally have it until he realized it was a gift from Lila. He recalled the new clothes she also gifted him and accused her of trying to control him by giving him gifts. Lila smiled and told him he was correct, saying her ultimate goal was to tame him and make him hers. It was a very obvious joke, but the fact that Yuri was as dumb as a rock didn't let him see it as what it was. He wasted no time in telling her that he couldn't be tamed, and said that even if she was Doflamingo, she would never be able to control him. He then surprised her when declared that if there was to be any taming done, he would be the one to tame her and make her his. His statement left her in a state of shock that all she could do was look at him until he asked her for more food. Later in the day, Yuri was in the library doing some homework when Lila came in with some tea for him. A little while after that, she returned with some pastries, which he agreed to take. However, when she returned a few more times in under 5 minutes, he screamed at her. He told her she was disturbing him, so she apologized and explained that she was only trying to be useful to him. Realizing that she might be bored and lonely, he told her she could stay as long as she didn't move a muscle like the Queen's guards. A few hours later, Lila had excused herself from the library to go handle some things. However, When she didn't return, Yuri went looking for her. When he got downstairs, he saw her going outside, so he went to the window to see what direction she would take. As soon as he saw her sneaking into the backyard like she was Swiffer the fox, he became suspicious and followed her. To his surprise, she was playing with a stray cat that had wandered into the garden. Yuri couldn't help but stare at her because of the way she smiled at the cat, and he told himself that she looked more beautiful. Lila soon noticed him standing there like a piece of furniture, so she asked if he wanted to pet the cat. Yuri declined her offer and revealed that he was scared of cats. He even admitted that he'd been staring at her because she looked so beautiful while she played with the cat. However, he hadn't come closer because of his fear of cats. When he said this, he raised his voice, so the poor cat got spooked and began hissing at him since it saw him as a threat. He'd, of course, had no idea that was the case until Lila explained it to him, so he told her he wanted to overcome his fear of cats. Lila offered to help him, but he told her that he wanted to do it on his own, so she left him alone. He then tried using a stick of long grass to play with the cat, but the moment it jumped to catch it, Yuri got scared and fell. This spooked the cat, so it ran off to the other side of the house, but Yuri refused to give up until it eventually began playing with him. Lila saw them from the upstairs window, so she came down with a plate of fish and suggested he feed the cat. While the cat ate, he got closer and tried to pet it, but stopped the moment Tom's menacing-looking older brother appeared. Seeing him freaked the spineless Yuri out, so he fell on his butt in fear. However, the cat he'd been trying to play with began hissing at their new acquaintance. Yuri was genuinely surprised that the cat was trying to protect him, so he decided to stop being afraid and stood in front of it. He did this with his eyes closed and his arms outstretched, hoping it would scare the bigger cat off, and it did. Yuri was so relieved when he walked away and was happy when the white cat began licking him. Sometime later, Lila returned home from the market and decided to check on Yuri to see if he'd made progress with the cat. She found him petting the cat affectionately and told him it was impressive that he was able to overcome his fear within a short period. As she watched him pet the cat, she tried to ask him to pet her as well.
What did he say?
But she got shy and tossed the idea into a garbage can. She then told the cat it was lucky to be petted by Yuri, which made him realize what she wanted. Before she could move, he reached out and began petting her head, saying how soft she felt. Embarrassed, Lila quickly tried to leave but accidentally dropped a photo of Yuri, which surprised him. When he demanded to know where it came from, she admitted that she kept it so she could stare at him whenever she wanted. Yuri insisted that she look at him instead, saying he was better eye candy than some photo, but Lila got so embarrassed that she ran away. After she left, his imagination began to run wild, as he imagined she'd taken the photo so she could put a hex on him during a ritual. An hour later, Lila returned to the backyard to call Yuri in for lunch, and she found him drawing the flowers that just bloomed. She tried to take a look at his drawing, but he hid it from her, saying it wasn't complete, and promised to show it to her later. As usual, the meal was delicious, and when Yuri finished eating, he asked Lila to teach him how to cook. This was because he wanted to find out what she did that made all the meals she prepared so delicious. After he told her this, Lila was surprised, but what shocked her the most was when he announced that he wanted to marry her so he could eat her food every day. Seeing how determined he was to learn, Lila agreed to teach him and suggested they make his favorite stew. They then went into the kitchen, and through Lila's guidance, Yuri was able to prepare the stew. By the time they were done, it was already evening, so Yuri insisted that Lila join in at the table for dinner. When Yuri tasted the food, he didn't like it as it tasted different from Lila's cooking. But Lila insisted it was delicious. He told her it wasn't and pointed out that it didn't taste the same way. So Lila told him it was because it was missing a special ingredient. Yuri immediately got up and said he knew she always added something to the food whenever she cooked. As soon as Lila said the special ingredient which she added to all his meals was love, Yuri exclaimed loudly that it was obvious she had put love in every meal. He then asked if the reason her other chores were always so perfectly done was because she'd done them all with love. Before she could respond, he fired off another question. This time around, he asked how she was always filled with love for him. The question caused Lila to blush intensely, so she covered her face with her hands in embarrassment and told him it was a secret. Later on, while Yuri took a bath and reminisced about the day he'd had, Lila arranged the library. After she closed the curtains, she noticed the book he'd been using to draw flowers earlier lying on his table. Under the drawing was a note, in which Yuri had compared the flowers to her eyes, and that made her smile. When it was time for bed, Lila made sure to help Yuri to bed, and after tucking him in, she bid him good night. Once she shut the door behind her, He began to wonder if she was an AI robot because he'd never seen her sleep before. He found it suspicious that she always woke up early and always stayed up late. This made him imagine her mixing a pot of what resembled a witch's brew, so he decided that he'd take on the role of Batman and observe her throughout the night. A few moments after he made this decision, Yuri fell asleep and was snoring like a pig, so he had no idea Lila came back into his room to watch him like a creep. A few days later, school resumed, and before Yuri left home, Lila fussed over him and rearranged his tie, clothes, and hair like a loyal waifu. Her actions made Yuri remark that they looked like a married couple, and that made her blush so hard. When Yuri got to school, all he could think about was Lila, and because he was so lost in thought, he didn't hear the other students talking about him. They all whispered about how he'd lost his parents and had to let go of his servants because he was now the opposite of Tony Stark. Some even questioned how he was able to afford his tuition, but none of them was brave enough to walk up to him and ask. The only person who took an interest in him was a timid girl named Tsukasa, but she wasn't able to speak to him because their teacher walked in. During lunch, she wasn't able to speak with him either, so she decided to wait until after school. When school ended later that day, Yuri began making his way out of the school premises when he spotted Lila. At the same time, Tsukasa spotted him and tried to approach him, but when she heard Lila say she had come to take him home, she stopped in her tracks. She became curious about Lila. She quickly hid behind a tree and watched them. She heard Yuri tell Lila that she shouldn't have come, but Lila insisted that it was her duty as his maid to ensure he got home safely. This made Tsukasa wonder if the rumors about him letting all his servants go were a lie, because she could see that Lila was a maid. However, when Lila asked Yuri if he was embarrassed about people finding out the kind of relationship they had, Tsukasa was shocked. While she tried to understand what sort of relationship they had, she heard Yuri say that just like Snow White, Lila was the fairest of them all, and he didn't want anyone else to lay eyes on her as she was his alone. This statement made Tsukasa conclude that Yuri was hopelessly in love with Lila and vice versa, reminding her of all the forbidden love books she'd read. Tsukasa decided not to disturb them as watching them was almost as interesting as watching Love Island. However, she was interrupted by her maid, Fujisaki, who told her she'd been looking everywhere for her. Tsukasa apologized and tried to explain what she'd been doing when Fujisaki noticed she saw Lila and Yuri. At the same time, Lila noticed them, so she approached them, and the first thing Fujisaki said made it clear that she and Lila were already acquainted. Tsukasa looked between the two in surprise. Lila then thanked Tsukasa for looking out for Yuri and asked her to try and be friends with him, so he didn't end up as the ugly class reject. Tsukasa assured her that she would do as she requested, so Lila thanked her and walked away with Yuri. As they disappeared from her line of sight, Tsukasa commented on how pretty Lila looked in her outfit and tried to suggest that Fujisaki wear something similar instead of walking around looking like an Alfred in training. A few days later, Lila finished her chores and decided to head to the market to do some last-minute shopping for dinner. In a rush, she left her phone on the kitchen counter, and when Yuri returned home, he was met by an empty house. At first, he thought she was hiding somewhere and waiting for the right moment to scare him, so he went looking for her. However, after he checked everywhere and couldn't find her, he realized he was starring in the Japanese remake of Home Alone. He decided to take advantage of the situation and went ahead to stuff himself full of snacks while he read his favorite manga. Meanwhile, Lila thought it would be a great idea to make a special dinner for Yuri using some sori fish, but every store she went to didn't have it. Refusing to give up and buy something else, she decided to go to the next town to see if she could find the One Piece. At home, Yuri finished his manga, and when he noticed it was already late, he began to wonder why Lila hadn't called him to say she'd be late. As he sat on the couch, he realized that it was the first time since Lila arrived at his doorsteps that he'd been alone. He couldn't help but feel lonely, and his mind began to wonder why Lila hadn't left him a note or even called to say she'd be late. He then picked up the phone book so he could get her number, but when he called her, he discovered she'd left her phone at home. This made him more worried than before as he had no idea if she was fine or not. At the same time, Lila had just purchased the fish she'd been searching for, and when she noticed it was late, she decided to call Yuri. However, after she put her hand into her shopping bag to retrieve her phone, she discovered she hadn't brought it along with her. Knowing that Yuri would be worried sick, she rushed to the station so she could catch the next train. Unfortunately, the train was delayed, but thankfully Fujisaki, who had just left the bookstore, spotted her and offered her a ride. When the limo pulled up in front of Yuri's gate, Lila got out of the car and thanked Fujizaki for dropping her off, after which she rushed inside to look for Yuri. She found him sitting on the couch with the cat, and he had his face buried in a pillow. Lila went to kneel before him so she could look him in the eye as she apologized for being late and not contacting him. To her surprise, Yuri accused her of placing a curse on him because he couldn't understand why he felt so sad while she was out. As tears pooled in his eyes, he told her that he didn't think he could live without her and begged her not to leave him. Lila understood his fears, so she took his hands in hers and praised him for being able to manage on his own. Yuri's cheeks turned red, so he turned away from her shyly and told her that she wasn't allowed to go anywhere without letting him know. Lila promised to do as he asked, and with that, the issue was resolved. A few days later, Lila couldn't help but notice Yuri was watching her like a hawk while she cleaned the windows. She was a bit concerned because she knew he wasn't watching her out of curiosity, but out of suspicion since he didn't trust her completely. Lila hated the fact that his suspicions were preventing them from getting closer, so she decided to bridge the gap one way or another. As the day progressed, she watched and followed him everywhere, telling herself that it was her duty to make sure he was doing all right. However, he confronted her in the hallway and asked why she had been following him around all day like a lost puppy. Since she couldn't come up with a reasonable excuse, she pointed out that he was always watching her as well. Yuri argued that her reasons for watching him were different from his, and after he told her he wouldn't let her find his weaknesses, he ran off. Lila tried to run after him, but she accidentally tripped and was about to fall, so Yuri rushed towards her. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned, and Yuri ended up with a face full of plots because he was shorter than Lila. When they both fell to the floor, Lila quickly moved off him and asked if he was hurt. Yuri assured her that he wasn't, and told her that he would keep a close eye on her, because she was a clumsy oaf. A little while later, Lila internally scolded herself for nearly suffocating Yuri with her natural airbags. She felt she'd made things worse between them, and Yuri wasn't helping matters because he kept watching her. This made her ask if he wasn't tired of staring at her while she worked, and he told her that he wasn't. He said she looked so beautiful every time she worked, so it was hard for him to tear his eyes away from her. His words surprised Lila and caused her brain to glitch, so she excused herself. When she was in the safety of her room, she fell to her knees and contemplated how to turn things around. Later on, while she took down the laundry, she noticed Yuri watching her again, so she approached him. She then told him she understood his feelings, so the dumb idiot asked how she knew he wanted to get to know her better. The thing is, Lila had assumed he was watching her because he was suspicious of her, so his question caught her off guard and she didn't know how to respond. When she finished the laundry, she went to find Yuri and asked if he wanted to have fun with her. The way and manner in which she said it seemed to suggest that she was asking if he could match her freak. But Yuri is a dense fool, so he didn't catch her drift. Instead, he told her that he'd been having fun since she came to live with him. However, he accused her of trying to trick him, but Lila assured him that it wasn't the case. She then suggested they play his favorite game, which was chess, so he could understand that she had no hidden agenda. This made him happy as it had been a long time since he played chess. As they sat down to play, Yuri told her that his father had been the one to teach him how to play chess. As he spoke, he recalled the day he learned to play chess very clearly. He had tried to go to the library to ask his father to play with him, but his mother had stopped him, saying his dad was busy. When he began to pout, she suggested he join her in the kitchen to make some pudding. Yuri had told her he wasn't interested because his father always said his mother couldn't cook to save her life. His mother had been upset by his words, so she vowed to make the best pudding ever and make her husband eat his words. Before she left his room, she told Yuri not to disturb his father, but Yuri ignored her instructions and went to the library. Seeing the look on his son's face prompted his father to leave his work and play with him for a while. He began teaching him what each chess piece was for and told him that the queen was the strongest one. This made Yuri ask if his mother was the strongest in their family, and his father laughed as he told him that she was. Just then, his mother walked in, and after she scolded Yuri for disobeying her orders, she scolded her husband for always indulging Yuri. After they both apologized and she forgave them, Yuri told his mother that his father had compared her to a chess queen. His father tried to play it off, saying he was just making an example, but his wife was so happy, so he gave up. She then announced that the pudding was ready and asked them to join her for tea. In the present, Yuri told Lila that he only got to play chess with his father a few more times after that, but he had enjoyed every minute of it. Lila noticed he had a sad smile, so she promised to always play chess with him, which lifted his spirit. The next day, when Yuri returned home from school, he seemed unusually quiet and thoughtful, which left Lila confused. She decided to make him some pudding since he talked about the pudding his mom made, hoping that would get him to speak. To her dismay, when she handed him the pudding, he didn't lash out or accuse her of being a scheming witch. Instead, he took the pudding, thanked her for it, and then went back into his room. Lila was so shocked she began to wonder if there was something wrong with him. The next moment, the door to Yuri's room opened, and he held up a piece of paper, which had her thinking she was about to be fired. When she took it, she realized it was a notice for the open house day taking place at his school the next day. Yuri explained that he'd been quiet because he didn't know how to ask her to come to the school. This was because he was scared she wouldn't want to come since she wasn't his guardian. But Lila told him she would gladly attend. The next day, Lila stood before her mirror as she remembered Yuri's instructions that she wear something appropriate. She tried on different dresses, but none of them were appropriate for a school event, so she decided to ask Fujisaki for help. Meanwhile, Yuri was walking towards his class when he passed a couple, who reminded him of his parents. He had told them about the open house day, hoping they would attend, but his parents said they couldn't as they were busy. Yuri had been alone that day, so he feared that the same thing would repeat itself and Lila wouldn't show up. When classes began and all the parents filled the classroom, Yuri didn't see Lila, so he began to doubt she would show up. Eventually she did, and even though she was dressed like a butler, Yuri didn't care because he was happy to see her. When school ended later, Yuri and Lila walked home together, and she apologized for arriving late. Yuri didn't respond, so she assumed something was wrong, but he surprised her when he ran ahead and turned to face her. With a smile so big, he thanked her for showing up and told her he was grateful to have her. A few days later, Yuri dashed up and down the hallway, trying to delude himself into thinking he was the Flash. Lila, who had been watching him, asked why he was running around like a headless chicken, so he told her he was practicing for sports day. Lila told him that running through the hallway wouldn't suddenly turn him into Usain Bolt, and offered to help him train. To his surprise, she began cheering, and when she realized Yuri was looking at her like she'd lost more than a few screws, she stopped. Shyly, she asked why he wasn't practicing, and he told her that it was because she looked too cute trying to cheer him on. He told her that as long as she kept cheering him on like that, he was sure he would win first place. However, he warned her not to do it on the day of the event because he didn't want others looking at her. The next day after school, Lila met Yuri in front of the school gates and asked how his day went. Yuri admitted that he had no idea what was taught in class because his mind had been occupied with thoughts of her. This made Lila tell him to do his best to focus during class, so he didn't grow up to become a shut-in NEET obsessed with his maid. As they began making their way home, they had no idea if Tsukasa was watching them from behind a tree, and she was extremely happy to see them together. When Fujisaki found her watching them, she told Tsukasa that she was acting like a creep, but the stubborn girl insisted there was nothing wrong with what she was doing. She said Lila and Yuri's relationship was so thrilling to watch, and told her that it always gave her butterflies. When she asked Fujisaki why she couldn't be more like Lila, who was gentle and sweet, Fujisaki told her to stop making stupid requests. After Lila and Yuri returned home, she prepared some biscuits for him, and while he ate them, he told her they tasted great. Lila thanked him for appreciating her work and then held up a book, which turned out to be a carefully thought-out training plan for sports day. She told him she would help him train every day until the day of the event, and he excitedly thanked her. On the first night of his training, Yuri lay in bed exhausted, so Lila offered to give him a massage to help relieve his sore muscles. Yuri agreed, and while she was doing the massage, he asked if there was anything he could do to please her as well. Now, if Lila was a cultured person like you guys, she would have assumed he wanted to give her a happy ending. However, she wasn't like that and only blushed because she felt embarrassed that he wished to return the favor. As the days progressed, Lila kept her word and helped Yuri train for all the events he would participate in during the sports day. The day before the event, in Tsukasa's home, she went to Fujisaki's office and asked if she could sit with her for a while. Fujisaki agreed, but when she noticed Tsukasa look upset, she asked what was wrong. Tsukasa sadly explained that her parents couldn't attend sports day because they were working, causing her to break down into tears. Fujisaki comforted Tsukasa and promised to attend the sports day in place of her parents, which made the girl very happy, so she hugged her. However, Tsukasa accidentally giggled while Fujisaki hugged her, which puzzled the maid, so she pulled back. The moment she did so, a bottle fell from Tsukasa's pocket, which made Fujisaki realize that Tsukasa had fooled her. The sneaky brat had poured the contents of the bottle into her eyes to make it look like she'd been crying, so Fujisaki would feel pity for her. The next morning, Yuri woke up before his alarm went off, and after getting dressed, he found Lila in the kitchen preparing lunch, so he decided not to bother her. Before he left the house later on, Lila bid him farewell and told her to dress comfortably when coming to school. Later at school, the students gathered on the field for the opening remarks, after which the announcer asked them to get ready for the first event. Tsukasa noticed Yuri looked pumped for the games and was about to approach him when two boys beat her to it. They kicked and teased Yuri, calling him a pathetic weakling, and told him to make sure he didn't drag their class down. Tsukasa was shocked by their behavior, thinking Yuri would become affected by their words. To her surprise, he stood up to the bullies and told them to look in the mirror the next time they wanted to see something pathetic. Tsukasa was impressed by his comeback, and when she heard Lila cheering Yuri on, she realized Lila was the source of his courage. She nearly lost her shit when Lila promised to give Yuri a gift if he did well during the games. For reasons best known to the culture degenerate, she began to imagine Lila giving Yuri a striptease. This made her approach Yuri and promise to help him in whatever way she could so he could receive his supposedly lewd reward. The first event was the tug of war, and Tsukasa stayed by Yuri's side, encouraging him to work hard so they could win. After the game, Tsukasa told Yuri that since they won he could receive his gift from Lila, and he told her that he didn't want one. He said seeing Lila smile was the only thing he was interested in, so that was why he made sure to win. While they were speaking, Lila approached them and told Yuri how proud she was of him. Tsukasa found their interaction adorable and thought they made a great couple, but since she was so dramatic, she fell to her knees. While the games were going on, Fujisaki and Lila stayed with the parents and guardians. When it was time for lunch, Lila invited Tsukasa and Fujikasa to join them for lunch. While they ate, Lila noticed Yuri looked sad, so she asked if something was wrong with him. He told her that he felt like he was inconveniencing her by asking her to come to his school functions when her main duty was to tend to the house. Lila said she didn't mind because she enjoyed taking care of him and seeing him happy. The next moment, an announcement was made over the loudspeaker, inviting parents and guardians to participate in a race. Lila decided to enter the race because Yuri begged her to, and as she stood with the other parents, she couldn't help but feel out of place. However, her determination to make Yuri proud was stronger, so she pushed ahead as the race began. At some point during the race, a parent accidentally bumped into her and nearly caused her to fall. Lila would have given up had it not been for Yuri, who kept encouraging her to do her best. In the end, she won first place, and while Yuri congratulated her, some of the students began to grumble that a maid had won the race. They said she was unworthy to stand as an equal to their parents or guardians, but Yuri defended her. He told them to shove their unwanted opinions up their butts and announced that Lila was his family, which surprised her. A few days later, Lila went grocery shopping, and by the time she got home, she was drenched to the bone because it had started raining. Yuri immediately rushed to find her a towel to dry herself with and told her to go take a bath. Lila decided to tease him and asked if he wanted to take a bath with her, but Yuri told her they would only do that when they got married. Lila was so shocked that he'd said something like that, but Yuri wasn't even fazed by it and walked away with the grocery bag. The next day, Lila served Yuri tea, and the moment he took a sip, he spat it out because instead of sugar, she added salt to the tea. Lila apologized and took it away, promising to bring a fresh pit for him, but he couldn't help but wonder if something was wrong with her. This made him keep his eye on her as she worked, and he noticed she was cleaning oddly right before a book fell from a shelf under her nose. Yuri rushed to her side, but Lila told him she was doing fine, even though she had a nosebleed. She then began walking away, mumbling something about needing to do the laundry, but she didn't get far because she fell to her knees in the hallway. Yuri rushed to her again and forced her into her room, where he put her to bed and took her temperature with a thermometer. When he discovered it was high, he insisted that she stay in bed for the rest of the day, saying he'd take care of her. However, he had no idea what to do, and as he began looking around her room for some pills, Lila told him it was rude to snoop around a lady's room. Yuri was embarrassed that she was caught in 4K, but he pushed it aside and told her to go back to bed. Lila insisted she was fine and said she was still strong enough to do her chores. When she began walking away, Yuri grabbed her hand and said he wouldn't let her go. To his greatest surprise, Lila started crying and admitted that she was afraid he'd send her away if she didn't do her duties. Yuri assured her that he wouldn't fire her for something that was out of her control and hugged her so she would stop crying. The next day, Lila felt better and was outside hanging up laundry, but Yuri was still concerned about her health and asked how she was feeling. Lila assured him that she was doing all right and apologized for inconveniencing him the day before. Yuri said he didn't mind and said he didn't like her being sick because it made him sad. His admission made her blush, and when he noticed it, he'd assumed she was still sick, but she assured him that it wasn't the case. Later on, while Lila cleaned the windows, she noticed Yuri had joined her and tried to send him away, but he refused to go. He said working together would ensure that the work got done faster, and admitted it was an excuse to spend more time with her. Immediately the words left his mouth. Lila's brain overheated and her face became as bright as a fire truck. As they made their way down the hallway, Lila told Yuri they would make dinner after they finished sweeping. While she was still speaking, Yuri suddenly sneezed, causing Lila to ask if he had gotten sick. He told her he was fine, attributing his sneezing to the sudden change in the weather, so she rushed to get him a blanket. After she draped it over his body, he took a good look at her as he wondered if she wasn't cold. For the first time since she began working for him, he asked why she always walked around with her milkshakes half exposed. Lila told him it was because she was hoping he'd get excited from staring at them for too long, but as expected the meaning of her words was lost to our empty-headed friend. Instead, he took her hand in his and loudly exclaimed that she was cold before he draped the blanket over her shoulders. Lila was surprised by his behavior and told herself that she liked him taking care of her. Yuri heard her say something, but when he asked her to repeat them, she refused and ran off. A few weeks later, Lila and Yuri sat in the library discussing what kind of costume Yuri wanted for Halloween. This was because Tsukasa had invited them to a Halloween party at her house and Lila had offered to make Yuri's costume. He told her he wanted to be a mage, and when Lila suggested he use a red or blue gem for his staff, he told her to use her favorite color instead. He then asked if she'd dress up as well because Tsukasa had extended the invitation to her as well. Lila didn't think it was appropriate, but Yuri managed to convince her that it would be a lot of fun, so she agreed. On the day of the party, Yuri and Lila showed up dressed as a mage and a dragon respectively. When Tsukasa laid eyes on them, she gushed about how good they looked and even made up a story about them. In her story, Lila was a dragon, who was feared by all because she had tried to destroy humans before. However, her stone-cold heart had softened after she fell in love with a human mage, and she swore to protect him with her life. While Tsukasa gushed about how her story was perfect, Fujisaki told her to stop feeding her crazy delusions at the expense of others. She immediately composed herself before she turned around and invited Yuri and Lila inside for the party. The room they had made use of was filled with many Halloween decorations and enough pastries that would send Shaggy and Scooby into a coma. While they ate and talked, Tsukasa couldn't help but feel glad that she had planned the party, and as if he'd read her mind, Yuri thanked her for inviting them. Yuri also thanked Lila for making his costume and asked why she had chosen green to be the color of the gem on his staff. Lila told him she had picked the color green because it was warm and gentle, and also her favorite color. All the talk of costumes made Tsukasa turn her attention to Fujisaki, and before Fujisaki could react, she was whisked away by the other maids. When she returned, she was dressed as a princess and Tsukasa gushed about how good she looked before insisting on a photo, much to Fujisaki's horror. A few hours later, Yuri and Lila left after thanking Tsukasa again for inviting them to her party. The next day at school, Tsukasa gave Yuri some of the pictures she had taken during the party, and he thanked her for it. She then asked why Lila hadn't come to pick him up as usual, and he told her she had a lot of work to do. When he mentioned that he was rushing home to lend Lila a hand, she was surprised as he was the first person she knew who helped their servants do chores. Yuri explained that it was because Lila was the only maid he had and that sometimes he helped her to reduce the workload. Meanwhile, Lila was at home taking down the laundry when the postman called out to her saying she had a package. After she collected the package and letters, she began sorting through them and discovered a letter addressed to her. When Yuri arrived at the house, he met Lila in the foyer, but the moment she saw him, she quickly hid the letter she was reading. Yuri found it suspicious and demanded to know what she was hiding, but she refused to show it to him, insisting that she would explain everything later. During dinner, Yuri couldn't help but feel something was bothering Lila, because the food was so bland and she hadn't spoken a word to him all night. Suddenly she spoke up, telling him that she'd enjoyed every moment she spent working for him, and said she would be leaving the next day. Yuri asked why, and she told him that she had been asked to return to the place she was before she came to him. She admitted she'd left without her employer's permission, so she had to return and face the music. Yuri didn't like the idea of her leaving and insisted she stay, saying he hadn't gotten to know her yet, so she couldn't leave. When he admitted that he'd be lonely and miserable without her, she squeezed the letter and threw it away. She then told him she wasn't going anywhere, which filled him with so much happiness that he hugged her tightly, grateful that she was staying. The following week at school, one of Yuri's teachers asked the class to draw a graph of their day and use different colors to indicate what they did every hour. While the teacher went around the class looking at what the students had drawn, Tsukasa noticed that Yuri's graph had only one color. During the break, she found him sitting outside lost in thought, so she approached him and asked what the problem was. Yuri told her he couldn't stop thinking about Lila no matter how hard he tried, so the self-appointed Cupid decided to listen to all he had to say. He told her that the first time Lila came to work for him, he was both curious and suspicious about her. However, as time went on, he discovered that anytime she crossed his mind, his chest would tighten up and his heart would beat faster. As he spoke, Tsukasa got so excited that she began bleeding from her nose, which made him worried, but she assured him that she was fine. She then asked what he thought of Lila as a person, and he told her that although she was very beautiful, everything about her was suspicious. He couldn't understand why a top-tier baddie like Lila had decided to come work and live with a wretched pauper like him. He went ahead to list all of Lila's good qualities and even admitted that the thought of her leaving him made him sad. All the mixed feelings he got whenever he was around Lila always left him confused with more questions than answers. He then asked Tsukasa if that meant he was sick, which she found disappointing because she had assumed he was going to say his feelings meant he was in love with Lila. In a final attempt to make him admit his feelings for Lila, Tsukasa asked what the nature of his relationship with Lila was. Yuri found the question confusing, which eventually made Tsukasa realize that she had been speaking to a dim-witted fool. After deciding that Yuri had flaunted his stupidity for far too long, Tsukasa told him that what was going on with him wasn't an illness. She said everything he felt for Lila was an indication that he loved her, and to no one's surprise, the idiot with an underdeveloped brain had no idea what love was. He kept trying to figure out what it meant as he walked home, and even when he got there, he was so lost in his thoughts that he just walked past Lila. Lila found it strange that he'd completely ignored her existence and tried to get him to acknowledge her presence by teasing him. However, nothing she did or said worked, and she began to fear that he wanted nothing to do with her. When he tried to walk into his room, she grabbed hold of his hand and asked if he was feeling sick. Yuri assured her that he was fine, and Lila nearly let it slip that she didn't like him ignoring her. As soon as she realized what she almost uttered, she scolded herself because she didn't want to come off as clingy. When Yuri asked what the matter was, she lied and said she was worried about him, so he told her he had something on his mind. She asked what it was, but since Yuri didn't have the balls to tell her he was trying to understand what love was, he said it was not important and walked away. The next day at school, he told Tsukasa that no matter how much he researched, he couldn't understand what love was. This made Tsukasa invite him to her house, saying she would teach him everything he needed to know about love, since she was a love guru of herself. When he arrived at her house later that day, he was greeted by the servants and Tsukasa introduced him to her mother. The entire process reminded Yuri of the time when his parents were still alive, and he still had an array of servants at his beck and call. Before they headed out to the garden, Yuri handed Tsukasa the cookies Lila had made for her, and she thanked him. In the garden, they had tea and biscuits, and Tsukasa asked Yuri why Lila hadn't come along with him to her house. He told her that Lila had escorted him, but said he'd asked her to return home when they were halfway to her house. Tsukasa thought it was a shame that Lila was missing out on the fun, so she suggested they send a car to pick her up. To her surprise, Yuri admitted that he was scared that Lila would decide to leave his mansion and come work for her family if he brought her there. He said Tsukasa had everything he'd lost, and if Lila decided to work for her family, she would earn more than he could ever afford to pay her. What he feared the most was that he could never make Lila happy, but he didn't let Tsukasa know that. Tsukasa then told him that Lila would never leave him because she always smiled and looked happy when she was with him. This revelation made him happy, and Tsukasa tried her best to contain her happy squeals. When Yuri asked if everything was okay, she changed the topic and reminded him that they had met up to discuss love. The next moment, she pulled out a stack of romance novels from under the table and told Yuri that reading them might help him understand love. Suddenly, the books were taken away from her by Fujisaki, who told her that if her father found out she'd taken the books from the library, he would scold her. Tsukasa tried to convince Fujisaki to let her have the books, but the maid refused and began walking away. Later that day, when Yuri got home, Lilula welcomed him with a smile as usual, and it made him remember what Supis had told him. A few days later, the art teacher gave Yuri's class an assignment to draw something they liked after carefully observing it. When Yuri got in that day, he asked Lilula for permission to draw a picture of her for his art project, and she agreed. Before he began drawing, he pointed out some of her unique features, which had Lilula blushing like a schoolgirl with a crush. When she recovered from the blush attack, she suggested that she pose for the picture. She did a few different poses and asked which she preferred, but Yuri surprised her by saying he wanted to draw her as she was. Immediately the words left his mouth. The dirty-minded maid began thinking he wanted her to pose like Benedict Bridgerton's models. In the end, he asked her to sit in a chair while he worked on the drawing, and when he finished, Lilula praised him for a job well done. However, Yuri wasn't impressed with it and told her that he'd failed to capture her true beauty, so he erased the drawing. The next morning, Yuri resembled the walking dead because he had dark circles under his eyes and looked very tired. He told Lilula that he had been unable to sleep because he was worried he would do justice to her beauty with his drawing. This made her assure him that she would do everything in her power to see that he slept well that night. The first thing she did was light a scented candle, hoping the smell would help him fall asleep, but Yuri told her that the only thing he wanted to smell was her, as she smelled better. She then suggested that he lay his head on her legs until he fell asleep, so that way he got to breathe in her scent. Yuri declined, saying that if he did that, her legs would go numb. Since that option was out, she gave him some warm milk, put on some soothing music, and then gave him a hot eye mask. Unfortunately, none of these were able to make him fall asleep, so he asked if she could lay next to him on the bed. As she lay beside him, Yuri admitted that he wanted to know more about him, and said he knew there were things she hadn't told him yet. Instead of confirming or denying what he said, Lilula began singing a lullaby, and as he drifted to sleep, Yuri recalled that the song sounded familiar. The next day, Yuri woke up feeling very energetic, and he thanked Lilula for helping him sleep. After having breakfast, he went ahead to finish his drawing, and when he presented it at school, he was given a trophy for having the best work. Days later, Yuri dreamt of a purple-haired girl who he'd played with while growing up, but for some reason, he couldn't see her face. When he opened his eyes, he saw the girl standing next to his window, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was Lilula. He then asked why she had bothered to come wake him up when it was her day off. Lilula told him that she did it because she couldn't ignore her morning duties, and as if on cue, Yuri's stomach growled. Lilula then left to prepare breakfast, while Yuri remained in bed as he tried to figure out who the girl from his dream was. Later that day, Yuri was in the library doing his assignments when Lilula walked in wearing casual clothes. Seeing her in something other than her uniform surprised him, so he accidentally dropped his pencil. The first thing that came to his mind was that she was going on a date, but he didn't try to find out if his suspicions were true or not. Before leaving, Lilula helped him pick up his pencil and asked if he would be alright without her. He'd assured her that he wasn't a baby and told her to enjoy the rest of her day without worrying about him. As she walked into town, Lilula decided to take a stroll since she was a bit early for her meeting. The next moment, a sweet aroma caught her attention, so she followed the smell and ended up in a pastry store. There were so many delicious-looking pastries that she had a hard time deciding which one she wanted to buy. The shop owner offered her a free sample, and while she ate it, she sensed someone watching her. She immediately turned around, but when she didn't see anything out of the ordinary, she brushed the feeling aside. After leaving the shop with her purchase, she made her way to a nearby cafe, where thoughts of Yuri occupied her mind, as she wondered how he was managing alone. A little while later, Fujisaki joined her at her table, and after placing her order, asked Lilula why she looked so worried on her day off. Lilula told her she was thinking about Yuri and asked Fujisaki if she ever got worried about Tsukasa. Fujisaki told her no, but Lilula didn't believe her and said that she'd changed a lot from the grumpy tomboy she once knew. She said taking care of Tsukasa must have softened her heart a bit, and that made Fujisaki blush, even though she tried to hide it. Sense was feeling embarrassed, she told Lilula to stop talking about it. So Lilula asked for advice on how to get closer to Yuri. Fujisaki told her that if she hoped to have any relationship with Yuri, she first had to open up to him. Lilula admitted that she wasn't sure she could do it, as she was scared Yuri wouldn't understand her. Fujisaki kept quiet for a while, and then pointed out that Lilula had changed from the unapproachable loner she went to school with. Before Lilula could respond, Fujisaki's phone began pinging from all the messages Tsukasa was sending to her. The nosy girl wanted to know what they were discussing and asked Fujisaki to take a picture with Lilula Fujisaki, wasn't ready to feed her crazy obsessions, so she told Lila that she had to leave because Tsukasa needed her. As she stood up to leave, she told Lila that it was the right time to speak to Yuri about her past. When she walked away, she passed by the table Yuri was sitting at, but had no idea he was the one. The truth is, Yuri had been so curious about what Lila planned to do on her day off, so he followed her like some detective. Now that he'd heard Lila's discussion with Fujisaki, he couldn't help but wonder what secret Lila was hiding. While he pondered the issue, a baby began crying somewhere in the cafe, so its mother started singing the same lullaby Lila had sung to him some nights before. Listening to the woman sing seemed to trigger a memory in Yuri, so later that day when Lila returned home, he confronted her. Yuri admitted that he'd followed her because he was curious, but was surprised to hear her conversation with Fujisaki. He then asked if the secret Fujisaki was referring to was about the time she met him in the past when he was still very young. Lila was surprised and asked how he knew, so he explained that he remembered a time from his childhood when his parents brought a young girl to the mansion. Even though the girl looked different from Lila, he was sure they were the same person. Lila told him that his suspicions were correct, so he angrily asked why she'd kept something so important a secret all the time she'd been with him. She told him that she was afraid he wouldn't believe her, so she had hoped he would remember their past together if she stayed by his side. As she spoke, she held her hands in front of her, so Yuri held on to them and swore that he would try to remember their past. He also told her not to be sad, because seeing her that way broke his heart. The next morning, Lila went to wake Yuri up but found his bed as empty as my bank account, so she went looking for him. Eventually, she found him in the backyard kneeling next to the flower beds, and when she called out to him, he asked her to hold out her hand. When she did, he placed the flower ring he made in it, which made her freak out a little until he explained that he was hoping to remember his past. Lila realized he was retracing his footsteps to the day they had both been playing in the garden, and he had given her the flower ring. She tried to talk about it, but remembered he had school, so he suggested they speak later when he returned from school. While he was at school, Lila found a way to preserve her flower ring so it wouldn't wither. After classes that day, Tsukasa bombarded him with questions about how his relationship with Lila was progressing. She was very desperate for any detail he could, seeing as her love life was as non-existent as her butt. Her questions made Yuri realize that he'd completely forgotten about his quest to learn about love because of everything that had happened. However, he told Tsukasa they had slept together, which shocked her, but she managed to recover quickly and asked when he had confessed to Lila. Yuri had no idea what she was talking about, so she called him a shameless cad for popping Lila's cherry without confessing his feelings for her. She said that he should have told Lila he was in love with her, but he told her he didn't know what love was. Tsukasa then explained that everything he felt for Lila was love. Yuri thought back to everything that had happened between him and Lila, and as soon as he realized Tsukasa was right, he ran out of the classroom. Yuri immediately hurried home, and even though he was breathless, he still managed to confess his love to Lila. He began by saying he liked everything about her, even her quirks, so she dropped her broom and was about to respond to his confession when she was interrupted. The cause of the interruption was Natsume, a loud-mouthed maid modeled after Makima, who demanded that Lila return with her immediately. Lila was surprised, but they invited her into the house, and after serving her tea, Lila introduced her to Yuri. Just as she said Natsume was her former classmate and colleague, Natsume cut her off and demanded she return home. She said she'd send a letter to Lila asking her to return, and since she didn't, she came to take her back herself. Lila reminded her that she had sent a letter in which she clearly stated she would not return, but Natsume refused to listen. She argued that Yuri had nothing to offer Lila and said he was exploiting her because he had no money to pay her with. Yuri told her that she couldn't take Lila, as she was his maid, and said that he wanted to know how Lila felt about him. His sentimental bullshit didn't faze Natsume, who said that Lila would be better off where she could earn more money. She told Yuri that he had nothing to offer Lila, but Lila cut her off, saying she decided to remain by Yuri's side, so she didn't care if he paid her or not. She told Natsume that not even the promise of all of Gold Roger's wealth and power would make her turn her back on Yuri. This angered Natsume, and she angrily said Lila was a fool for choosing an underdeveloped man-child over her. Yuri felt hurt by her insult, so Lila warned Natsume to watch her tone and speak to him respectfully. Realizing that Lila wouldn't change her mind, Natsume declared that she would test Yuri to find out if he was worthy of being Lila's master. The first thing she did was ask him to explain the theory of relativity to her, and Yuri admitted that he had no idea what it was. Natsume began to mock him for not knowing it, so he threw the question back at her. Unlike Yuri, who admitted he didn't know the answer, Natsume pretended to be knowledgeable on the topic and said a whole lot of nonsense. Since neither Yuri nor Lila knew this, they didn't call her out for her lies, and Yuri promised to study hard so he could become as smart as her. Natsume still refused to cut him some slack, so she asked if he had money. So Yuri told her that, unlike Megan Thee Stallion, he didn't make any money as he wasn't a star. This made her happy as she told him that a good master was someone who knew how to save and manage his money. Her statement made bring out his piggy bank, which he used to save his allowance every month so he could buy a gift for Lilo, was moved by his dedication, and since Natsume didn't want to be left out, she told them she also had some money. However, when she put her hands in her pocket, she came up empty, so Lila teased her about her spending habits. Annoyed, Natsume tried to defend herself but accidentally knocked over a lamp, causing it to break. Yuri quickly rushed to check on Natsume to ensure that she wasn't hurt, while Lila went to get a broom. Natsume was surprised by Yuri's kindness, and when she asked why he wasn't mad at her, he said it was because she was Lila's guest, and added that it had been an accident. When Lila returned with a broom, Natsume warned her to be wary of Yuri, accusing him of using nice words to manipulate her. However, Lila didn't appreciate the way she spoke about Yuri, so she told Natsume never to speak ill of her master. Still, Natsume argued that everything she did was for Lila's sake, so Lila asked why she was so obsessed with her. She stated that even when they were in school, Natsume always found a reason to be close to her. Natsume said nothing, so Lila thanked her for trying to look out for her, but told her to keep her opinions to herself. As Natsume shook in anger, Yuri recalled what Tsukasa had once told him about the way people express their love. This made him ask Natsume if she loved Lila, and she immediately denied it. Yuri called her a bad liar and made references to everything she'd done and said since she arrived, stating that it was all because she loved Lila. Natsume told him he was being delusional, so he told her that just like how she wanted Lila to go home with her, he wanted Lila to stay. However, he wasn't ashamed to admit it was because he loved her. Natsume was shocked by Yuri's boldness, but eventually she stopped arguing and admitted that she did love Lila. She said she'd been worried sick about her well-being since she left, which was why she tracked her down, hoping to get her to return home. Lila apologized for making her worry, but still told her that she had no plans whatsoever to return home with her. The next day, after Yuri was at school, Lila decided to tidy up the house, and when Natsume offered to help, Lila said no because she was a guest. However, Natsume stubbornly stayed by Lila's side as she worked, and when she was done, Natsume asked if she didn't get exhausted from doing all the house chores alone. Lila said that she didn't see it as a burden as she was willing to do a lot for her master's sake. After Lila left to start preparing dinner, Natsume told herself that she didn't like Yuri, as he was the reason Lila was acting the way she did. When Yuri returned from school later on, the first thing he did was tell Lila that he'd missed her. Both girls were shocked when he admitted that Lila was all he could think about at school, so as soon as school was over, he ran back home. Natsume couldn't help but remember her master as watched Lila tell Yuri to be careful next time, and when Lila asked why she looked so serious, she assured her that everything was fine. After Yuri got changed, he went to the kitchen and asked Lila if she needed help with the cooking, and she said no. He then went to the dining room to sit with Natsume, who was busy eating chips. When she noticed him staring at her, she told him to take a picture as it would last longer, but he told her he didn't want to ruin his album with her hideous face. He did, however, say he didn't think she was a maid because she acted more like a backstreet thug. Natsume argued that she was a maid and tried to prove it by helping Lila in the kitchen, but that ended in disaster. Refusing to give up, she attempted to help with the laundry and sweeping, but they ended badly as well. Yuri then asked her to let Lila handle the chores alone, but the stubborn girl refused to listen. She picked up a bucket of water, but since she accidentally spilled some of it, she slipped on the water and fell. The water in the bucket ended up on both her and Lila, so Yuri suggested they take a bath so they could avoid getting sick. While the girls bathed, Lila confessed that Natsume's presence helped distract her from her mixed feelings. She said she hadn't expected Yuri to confess to her all of a sudden, so she didn't know how to respond. Natsume told her there was nothing to think about, and pointed out that she looked happy being with Yuri, which surprised her. The next day, Lila went looking for Natsume, but couldn't find her anywhere in the house and saw the open magazine on the table. She assumed she'd gone out. Meanwhile, Tsukasa asked Yuri if he'd finally confessed to Lola, and he told her that he had, which made her happy. He also told her that things at the house had gotten very lively since they had a new family member. Tsukasa immediately assumed he was referring to a baby, but after Yuri explained things to her, she changed her mind. She insisted that Natsume was Yuri's love rival and said she was a necessary addition to strengthen his relationship with Lola. As they walked towards the gate, Natsume, who had come to pick up Yuri, spotted them. She immediately assumed Yuri was a two-timing skirt chaser and was about to confront him when Fujisaki walked past her. The moment she recognized her, she remembered Fujisaki had been famous at the academy for being a bully, so she stayed back. She remained in her spot until Fujisaki dragged Tsukasa away and Yuri approached her, asking why she was at his school. She told him she'd come to take him home, and as they walked home, she asked who Tsukasa was, so he explained their relationship to her. As they continued on their way, Natsume told Yuri she would return home soon and asked for his help to get Lola a gift. However, when she turned to face him, she noticed he wasn't beside her. She saw him confronting some boys who accused him of bumping into them and causing one of them to drop his bun. Yuri told them he'd done nothing wrong and pointed out that they had been the ones to bump into him. This annoyed the boys, so one of them tried to punch him in the face, but he couldn't do so as Natsume intervened. One word from her and both boys ran away like the pair of cowards that they were. Natsume then commended Yuri for standing up to them, but advised him to be careful the next time he found himself in a similar situation. Yuri thanked her for her help and asked if there was anything he could do to repay her. Natsume told him there was, so after they got home, they went up to his room to discuss. Lola found it strange that the two of them were getting along like old friends, but she was happy about it. When she went up to bring them some tea, she found the pair arguing over what outfit suited her the most, so she quietly closed the door and left. The sound of the door clicking made them stop, and then they began discussing the real issue at hand, a surprise Christmas party for Lola. Natsume had told Yuri she wanted to host the party to thank Lola, so he agreed to go along with her plan to make it work. The plan was simple. He would tell Lola that Tsukasa had invited him for a Christmas party, after which Natsume would suggest they go shopping to pass the time. After the first phase of the plan worked out, Yuri asked Tsukasa to help him with the planning of the party, and she happily agreed. Even so, she believed Yuri should take Lola out on a romantic date to celebrate Christmas. On the day of the party, Lola was reluctant to leave Yuri alone, but he assured her that he would be fine. Soon after she left with Natsume, Tsukasa, and Fujisaki arrived to help Yuri decorate the house. Tsukasa was placed on decoration duty, while Yuri and Fujisaki went to the kitchen to bake the cake and prepare the food. When Yuri was done frosting the cake, Fujisaki noticed he had some cream in his nose, so she wiped it away with a cloth. Yuri thanked her, but she told him he didn't have to, as it was something she always did for Tsukasa. So Yuri declared that she must truly love Tsukasa. Fujisaki tried to deny it, but she was cut off by the sound of a camera clicking. When she realized Tsukasa had taken a picture, she confiscated the camera and refused to give it back despite her pleas. In the end, she felt bad, so she asked Tsukasa to help Yuri complete the cake decoration, which she was more than happy to do. Meanwhile, as Lola and Natsume walked around town, Natsume was unsure what to talk about, so she tried looking up information on her phone but couldn't find anything useful. When she spotted a shop selling crepes, she tried to go buy some, but she tripped and hurt her nose in the process. Lola hopped her to an empty park bench and then offered her a handkerchief to wipe her bloody nose. Natsume then tried to apologize for her behavior the past few days, but Lola beat her to it. She thanked her for taking her out and then suggested they enjoy the rest of the day together, which they did. On their way home that evening, surprised Natsume by giving her hairpins, so Natsume gave Lola her Christmas present and told her she would be leaving soon. When they got home, everywhere was dark, but the next moment the place lit up, causing Natsume to stare in awe. However, she noticed Lola wasn't by her side, so she rushed into the house to find her only to discover she'd been dealt the ultimate Uno card. The party she thought was for Lola turned out to be for her, because Yuri had felt guilty about lying to Lola, so he told her about the party. Lola had been the one to suggest they throw the party for Natsume, and they were glad it worked out just fine. Natsume was grateful for the surprise, but when Fujisaki asked how she was doing, she became scared. Fortunately, Tsukasa saved the situation by inviting everyone to gather around the table, and they all enjoyed the party together. After the party, Fujisaki carried a sleeping Tsukasa in her arms and thanked Yuri for inviting them over before leaving. A little while later, Yuri and Lila left the gift Yuri made for Natsume on the table beside her as she slept. The next day, just as Lila finished cleaning up the house, someone rang the doorbell, so she went to see who it was. To her surprise, it was her former employer, so she invited him and offered him some tea while they discussed. Meanwhile, Yuri and Natsume left the store with the things Lila had sent them out to buy, and Natsume complained the whole time. Yuri reminded her that she'd chosen to go shopping because she didn't want to clean up the house, so she kept quiet. She then thanked him for teaching her how to express her feelings and surprised him by saying she would confess her feelings to her master when she got home. At the mansion, Lila apologized to her former master for suddenly going MIA and explained her reasons for doing so to make him understand. She told him that after her parents had passed away, none of her relatives wanted her. Yuri's parents, who had been friends with her parents, were the ones who stepped up and took her in. She had felt a bit uncomfortable with them, but because they were so kind and welcoming, she was able to relax. The first night she spent in the mansion was the day she met Yuri, because he approached her while she stood on the balcony. His curious eyes had found hers, so she tried to hide them because she felt ashamed, but Yuri surprised her by complimenting her eyes. After living with them for a year, she requested that they allow her to enroll at the Academy for Maids, as it was the only way she could think of repaying them for their kindness. A few years later, she began working at his estate, but when she heard about Yuri's parents' death, she left everything and rushed back home to support him. Soon after she finished her story, Yuri and Natsume returned home, and they were surprised to see the man. Natsume asked why he had come, and he said he came to take her back home, and as expected, she grumbled. Since Yuri had no idea who he was, Lila introduced him as her former employer. Upon hearing this, Yuri immediately assumed that he'd come to take Lila back, so he jumped over the couch and went to stand in front of her. He told the man that he wouldn't let him take Lila away as she was his maid, causing the man to laugh. He'd assured Yuri that he hadn't come to take Lila, and that made him feel relieved. With the issue sorted out, the man told Lila that he and Natsume would take their leave, so Yuri and Lila bid them farewell. Before they left, the man asked Yuri to take care of Lila, and promised to let Natsume visit from time to time. Later that evening during dinner, things between Lila and Yuri were a bit awkward, because they hadn't been alone since the day he confessed his feelings. This made Lila suggest they go somewhere the next day, and Yuri became very excited with the idea of going on a date with Lila. The next day, as Yuri and Lila walked to town, she stopped to give him a little twirl and show off her new dress. She admitted she'd worn it because of their date, and Yuri told her that she looked beautiful, which made her blush. As they continued walking, Lila suggested they go to a cafe to get some hot chocolate, and Yuri agreed. On their way to the cafe, Tsukasa, who was complaining to Fujisaki about not wanting to attend her piano lessons, spotted them. She tried to convince Fujisaki to let her follow them, but Fujisaki refused to let her do so. Later at the cafe, while Yuri and Lila enjoyed their drinks, Yuri told her there was somewhere he wanted to visit. The place turned out to be his parents' grave, and as they stood side by side, Yuri admitted he'd been scared to come there. However, being with Lila had given him courage, which was why he had insisted they visit and say hello to them. Before walking away, they placed 2 roses on the grave, and Lila promised to take care of Yuri on their behalf. On their way home that evening, the Christmas lights adorning the trees made Lila's eyes sparkle, so Yuri complimented her. While they talked about how much fun they were having together, Yuri took Lila's hand in his. The next moment, it began to snow, and Lila decided it was a good time to ask Yuri how he truly felt about her. Yuri told her he wasn't sure what kind of love he felt for her, but said he wanted to find out as their relationship progressed. Satisfied with his answer, she told him that his confession had startled her, but admitted that she wasn't sure how to respond to it. Yuri told her not to rush and reminded her that they had a lot of time to figure things out. They then continued on their way home, chatting happily about everything and nothing at the same time. The next morning, Yuri woke up to find everywhere covered in snow, so he went outside to build a snowman. Upon getting there, he saw that Lila had already made one, so he built one that resembled her. When Lila joined him outside, he made some snowman kids, saying they were a family, and when he finished, Lila noticed his hands were cold. She tried to warm them up with her breath, but Yuri noticed her hands were cold as well. However, the touch made him feel warmer, and when he told Lila, she suggested they go inside to warm up. That's all for today's video. If you like anime recaps, check out this video right here. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Until next time,